I'd like to welcome you all to this edition of Views from the Capitol. We're going to have a conversation about the My Safe Schools roadmap that came out last week. We're joined today by Governor Whitmer. We really appreciate your time in taking a few of our questions and talk about that roadmap. I am Jennifer Smith, Director of Government Relations for the Michigan Association of School Boards, and I'm going to act as a moderator for this meeting for all of you. We will have you all muted just to keep down on the background noise. If you have a question, please type it in the chat box. I appreciate everyone who sent questions ahead of time, and we will try to get through as many as we can. I also want to just introduce real quick a couple of members of my team that are with us. That's Jeff Cobb, our Assistant Director of Government Relations. He's going to be helping with some of the questions in the chat box as well. And Deshandria Bedenfield, our Policy Analyst and Grassroots Coordinator, who is going to help us on the tech side if any of you have issues. And we're joined by our Executive Director, Don Wetruba, and we'll give him a second to talk at the end. But right now, I will turn it over to the governor. Thank you again so much, and I will just let you go.
All right, thank you. So glad to be here with all of you, and I'll keep my comments short so that we can jump into more of a dialogue instead of a monologue. But I'll just make a couple of observations. First and foremost, thank you for what you do. I know that school boards are tough jobs, and the work that you do is so important. As mom of kids in public school, or one child who's going back to public school and the other who's going off to college, hopefully this fall. I value the tough job that you have. And my sister's a school board member in the state of New York. And we were just chatting the last couple of days about what school is going to look like as they think about the return to in-person education. You know, the coronavirus is a novel virus, and we all know that by now, but what I am frequently reminding people of what that means is it's new. We have learned an incredible amount about the virus in the last 3 months. We're going to know a lot more in the next 3 months. And it's going to be really important that we are nimble, that we are paying attention to the science and making decisions around protecting people. And the people in your charge, of course, are our workforce in our schools and our kids and all of their families. And so it was really important to me, I think, and my administration and the people of our state that we do everything we can to get it right. 8 weeks from now is not that far, as you all know better than anyone. And yet we know that this virus can grow exponentially in a matter of days, or it can be contained. And what we see going on in the South, what we see going on in other states is alarming. And that's what we are so focused on trying to avert here in Michigan. The issue of wearing masks, it should not be a political issue. It should just be something that every one of us does. And masking up today is what is going to put us in a stronger position to return to the classroom in the fall. And what that looks like is obviously going to be a partnership between the administration and the epidemiology and local health departments, but obviously our school boards. And so I just want to thank you for doing what I think is one of the most important public service jobs there is, and tell you that we want to continue to have a partnership as we are navigating these next steps, that we are mindful of how critical it is that we get this right, and that as we make determinations, your vantage point is something that's really important. And so we certainly want to stay close as things develop. But with that, Jennifer, I'm happy to open it up and make it more of an exchange.
Okay. We know you did this advisory council. We have two of those members with us today, Mary and Anupan, that are board members. But do you see a role for that council now that the roadmap is out? Is there a role for that council going forward? Are they going to look at other issues that we need to talk about this fall, such as broadband or any other laws that we need to look at?
Yeah, so I definitely see a role. You know, in the re-engagement of the economy, I put together a group called the Michigan Economic Recovery Council, and it's made up of health experts and business expertise. And it was what informed my decision to have a 6-phase in re-engagement. That MERC is not done though. They're going to continue working because of course we've got to increase compliance with best practices. And so there will be announcements coming in the coming days in terms of work that they are continuing to do. And I feel the same way about this council. I think that this expertise, and we know there were, over 1,500 people, I think, that wanted to be a part of this council. So it really was an area that so many people wanted to contribute and make sure we get right. And so I think that, now that the report is out, it's my hope that the advisory council continues to meet on more of an ad hoc basis, but continues to meet to help identify supplemental guidance that schools are going to need so that they can implement the roadmap. There are going to be lots of things that will come, and that additional guidance would be really helpful. I know that they have formed, I think, 6 subcommittees, and that's where a lot of the work will need to happen. So one of the subcommittees, for instance, is focused on policy and budget. And we know that that's going to be an important aspect to getting it right, that we have the resources to back it up. And so putting forward a legislative policy recommendation that's needed, that is truly representative of the many and diverse districts that we have, is going to be really critical. And so, because we all know that current statute probably doesn't reflect our current reality. And so for all of these reasons, it is my intention and hope that this council will continue to meet as needed as an ad hoc basis, and work with us to navigate all of the path ahead.
I know one of the policy things we've been talking about a lot, and we hear a lot from our members, is the 75% attendance threshold to count the day as a day of instruction, and just the pupil count going forward. Not knowing what October is going to look like for that pupil count, being able to use last year's pupil count maybe instead of this year, so that we have some stability in our budgeting. Do you think that there will be guidance about new pupil accounting? Is this something that maybe we have to wait for the budget to come out, because that's normally included in there? Or is this something that we could be able to address sooner than the beginning of the school year or the beginning of the state's fiscal year?
Yeah, I think you're asking a really important question, and I would, welcome thoughts about what we can do on a quicker timeline. I think that, there are a lot of the usual requirements that just are not going to be applicable or feasible in this new environment that we are navigating, and I think this is one example.
So Michigan is currently in phase 4 and 5, depending on our part of the state. If we go backwards, that changes a lot of things. Is there any way, and I'm sure we probably know the answer to this question, but is there any way to give assurance about what phase schools are going to open in next month?
So where we were 2 months ago, we could never have imagined being here now. And so predicting where we'll be in 2 months is impossible. But what we can do is plan for a number of contingencies. And that's precisely what the council has done by promulgating practices based on whether or not we're in phase 3, phase 4, or phase 5 of the re-engagement. Right now, 6 out of 8 regions are in phase 4. That would mean we could go back into the classroom if we find ourselves in phase 4 when school begins. We were hoping that we would be all of the state in phase 5 by now, but we've seen our numbers have an uptick. I think one of the difficulties in this moment is that people, of course, want assurances. I understand that. I do too. But the fact of the matter is, we have to really watch the numbers. We have to watch the numbers in terms of how many tests are being conducted, what the rate of positivity is. We have to watch hospitalizations, although we always have to remember that's a lagging indicator. And so hospitalizations in 3 weeks might tell you how much COVID-19 was spread at 4th of July weekend. And that's part of the challenge that we're confronting. Then I'd also say that context is really important. 140 cases coming out of Harper's Bar in East Lansing, where we can trace and isolate the population, is very different than 140 cases randomized across Lapeer County, for example. A randomized number of cases is more likely community spread and much harder to isolate and harder to contain. And so that public health context is really important as we are, making determinations about what phase we either are ramping up into or we're going back into. So the most important thing that we can do right now is follow the science and get the best information that we can so that our decisions are as well informed as possible. I think our goal is to give people a clear vision where we hope to be and what can come next. But our important individual decisions that we make right now around mask wearing and hand washing and social distancing will contribute directly to our ability to re-engage or move into even a better phase in terms of greater re-engagement, like phase 5. So we've made a lot of progress. I was on the phone last night with my fellow governors from Ohio and Indiana and Minnesota, 2 Republicans, 1 other Democrat, and every state is navigating this, and their numbers are a lot more concerning than ours. But I don't want to have that sound like we're spiking the football, because our numbers are moving in the wrong direction right now, and that's why it's so critical that we are all doubling down on these best practices. Because if we want to be back in schools in 8 weeks, we've got to do the hard work right now of mask wearing and the culture change that needs to happen for our long-term security.
Right. And some of those districts along the borders of the regions, you may have school districts that part of the district is in phase 5, part of the district is in phase 4. How do they determine which plan they're supposed to follow? And I think sort of to go along with that, is there any thought to, instead of doing the regions, making the regions smaller into more of a county-based?
Yeah, so I appreciate the question. I think it's a good question. It is, something that shows that we are navigating uncharted territory here. And so as we are doing this, we're trying to make sure that we're listening to the smartest people and making decisions that are well informed. The regions were determined based on a couple of different things. One is the healthcare region. So when you think about public health and ability to hospitalize and treat patients, those healthcare regions are really important. So that was one of the overlays. Another one was the workflows. So where people travel from where they live to work, because that's how COVID can be transmitted. COVID doesn't move, it's people that move. And so really understanding patterns of movement in this state. And that's really what informed the 8 regions that Merck is using and that we have used as a state. Of course, when you draw a region, we know that some districts are going to straddle regions, and that could create some confusion. And that's why we did address this in the Executive Order 2020-142, which accompanied the roadmap. A district that straddles regions is treated as if it were located solely in the region designated as higher risk. That's because we need to be very conservative as we are, making decisions. And so, in other words, if a part of the district is in region 4 and parts in region is in a phase 4 and phase 5, the whole district needs to comply as though they are in phase 4 of their plan. And we wanted to articulate this early on so that as districts are writing their policies, they are able to reflect which region that they are in, so that individual families aren't looking and trying to make the determination on their own.
And under the roadmap, there are things that are strongly recommended and required. If a district chooses not to follow a strongly recommended aspect of the roadmap, do they have to justify their reason, and will they have to put it in writing?
Well, I think a district will probably have to justify their reasoning with their constituency, because I know that these measures that we have promulgated are widely thought to be the standard. But we recognize that at the local level, these decisions need to be made with the interests of a particular community. With as many districts as we have, we know that it can't be one size fits all. And so that's precisely why we wanted to give the autonomy for school boards and districts to write what works best for them. Now, there are certain requirements, of course, that are an expectation, and that is what what districts will have to follow. But where there are recommendations, that is in the purview of the district to make those decisions. But certainly parents are going to want to understand why. They're going to ask questions, and that's part of why the partnership is so important. I've been working closely with the business community, and one of the reasons is we have to have consumer confidence. Just because you declare something safe doesn't mean that the general public is going to embrace it if they don't have confidence that it is for them or for their workforce. And so as districts, this is a lot of the same balance that you will be confronting as well. You want to give parents the confidence that you're doing everything you can to keep their kids safe, as well as your workforce, because we want teachers and bus drivers and students alike to come back with the confidence that it's safe to do so.
So speaking of teachers, we've got a few questions related to them that I'm going to try to bunch into one. But there are things like, what if a case is found, or if a teacher has to quarantine for 14 days and they either don't have the time in their leave bank, or it depletes their leave bank for the 14 days, sick days. And how do we best protect those teachers who are in the K-5 classrooms where the kids may not be wearing masks?
Mm-hmm. So I think that these are really critical questions that there's not an obvious answer to. We're working with national experts. I mean, Dr. J is my right hand, but obviously working with the local public health offices across the state, working with nationally known experts, asking these same questions about how do we perhaps cohort children so that there's not so much interaction, and that if someone does get sick, that it's easier to trace and contain. I think that there are a lot of really important aspects that we are still navigating, frankly, and going to need your help to address. I think that in this moment, it's become more important than ever that we are listening to people on the front line, that we are making decisions that are based on the community public health and not just the individual needs. This is something that is incredibly hard, and every decision, you'll all be confronting this, every decision that I've had to make during this pandemic has weighed heavily on me. And yet, I guess maybe for a little perspective, to know that every district in the country is trying to get this right as well. One of the things that I know won't work is if we mandate that everyone goes back to school without having confidence in a plan to keep them safe. And so that's what all of this is about, to keep those teachers who are working with younger kids safe, to address the situation that some children aren't going to be able to tolerate a mask, but that the vast majority are going to be expected to in the classroom all day long. So I don't know that I've got a concrete solution, but I can tell you that we want to work closely with you so that when a teacher does need to stay home, or a bus driver or whomever, that they can do so, but and that we keep our kids safe as well.
So under the EO, it says if a student or staff is not medically able to wear the face mask, that they would not have to do so. How will that be determined, and how will a district know if that student isn't wearing a face mask because they're medically unable?
So I don't know. I've got Brandon. I've got two people from the council on if they want to take a shot at answering that question. I know you've had a lot of conversation about it.
I'll defer to the council members first, and then can answer after that. Well, Jen, will you repeat the question one more time?
How will a district determine if a student's not medically able to wear a face mask? So they don't have to, but how will a district know that that student that's not wearing a mask is that there is a medical reason versus a person?
So we will consult. I mean, we did consult on this question with our Office of Legal Counsel, and the basic answer is that it needs to come from a medical professional. There needs to be something signed by a medical professional indicating, that a student is unable to medically tolerate. This is not something that can be self-attested, if you will.
And I know, Governor, we're running a little short on your time, so I'll end with the big question everybody always has, and that's money. If the federal government doesn't act, how are we going to be able to afford some of these new costs? Will there be funding for PPE for the schools or for students who can't afford masks or staff who can't afford masks? We know the budget looks dire right now. We do appreciate the work that's been done to prop up this year, but we know going into next year, we're looking at another big hole. So what's the best, worst news you can give us on the budget scene right now?
Well, I know that everyone here has been paying attention to the budgets that I've introduced the 2 years I've been in office, and they've reflected the value that I ran on, which is supporting public education. You know, we had to announce a lawsuit yesterday against the U.S. Department of Education that the Attorney General has made Michigan the lead state on because of the interpretation to divert CARES Act dollars from public schools into private and parochial schools. And that's something that it flies in the face of the intention of the CARES Act. And that's something that has, I think Dr. Rice said it was a $13 million cost to schools. It's meaningful, and it's important that we fight to get every dollar that we can into our public education system, especially now. I also know that the learning loss that kids have just in a regular summer is real, and certainly for kids in higher poverty situations, it's always more pronounced. And yet, this is going to be unlike any summer we've contemplated. It's the learning losses and the requirements for additional wraparound services are going to be greater than ever on top of PPE needs. So that's why we negotiated the supplemental that we did so that we would have dollars to put into public education, but we're also focused on trying to negotiate a budget going into the fall that reflects that as well. I still believe that the federal government is going to step up with some form of HEROES Act. I expect the Senate to put their own stamp on it. Maybe it'll be called something different. They'll probably have different terms in it. But at the end of the day, this is a 50-state problem. Every state in the nation is confronting this, and every state in the nation, all the governors, we've been working very closely with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, are bringing to bear pressure on Washington, D.C. to get this done. Because every state in the nation has certain dollars that they have discretion over. They all go to public education, public health, and public safety, arguably the most three important investments we make in the midst of a global pandemic. And so I do believe that we will get there on this additional supplemental coming from the federal government, but I don't think that any of us can rest until it has been accomplished. And so to the extent that you're able to weigh in with, even the House that already took a vote, if you have legislators, if you've got Congress people, Republican and Democratic, they should hear from you because you've got an important voice, and they should have the support because ultimately they're all going to have to take an affirmative vote on whatever it looks like. And so knowing what it means to their schools and the children in their districts is absolutely critical. So I ask for your help on that front.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Do you have any last thoughts or comments for us before you have to sign off?
So I see that there's a lot of questions coming in the chat. If you want to grab those and give them to Brandy, we will get back with you so that everyone can benefit from having that information. Some of them, we might not be able to give you an answer immediately, but we will do our best because I think, you're asking thoughtful questions, and I know the whole reason is to make sure that we get this right. So thank you very much for your time and for everything that you do. It's you got a tough job.
Thank you, Governor. And as the Governor said, we are keeping track of all of the questions that are in there. So if they do not get answered during our webinar today, we will be searching out answers and seeing what we can find out. I'm also noticing some of them are legal and MDE questions. So we will also be parsing those out to the people that we think can answer them best. But now I want to introduce Mary Jabara from Okemos Public Schools and Anupam Cho Sinhu from Plymouth Canton Community Schools. They're both school board members who served on the Governor's Advisory Council. And I'm going to let them tell you a little bit about their experience, and then we're going to turn some of these other questions over to them. Mary, why don't we start with you?
Okay, great. Thank you. Like Jennifer said, I'm a member of the Okemos School Board, and it was a privilege and an honor to be on the council. I am also part of one of the subcommittees that the governor mentioned. I'm on the Mental Health and Wellness Committee, which focuses specifically on the roadmap through the wellness lens. So we go through and read every line and kind of really drill down to where it directly affects someone and their mental health and the whole wellness of the students and the staff. My main concerns with being a part of this committee were a lot to do with mental health and wellness. So I was really grateful for this subcommittee and all the subcommittees, because I think it's so important when you're dealing with, a state that has 587 districts and over 1.5 million kids. I think it's really important that we can drill down to as much of the specifics as we can when we are focusing on such large groups and large numbers of a population. Everything that we did was done with very thoughtful practices. Something that I want to stress that I don't think comes across very well is things that are in there that say required are obvious, but the strongly recommended sections, for my take on it, are also requirements. I know that the council's wish is that this is taken as a minimum, that school districts take these roadmaps and implement them as minimum guidelines, not as this is all you have to do and everything's going to be great. I know in our district we are going to take a very conservative approach, and I would really advocate that everyone does that, because the roadmap is a tool. It's not a save-all, and everyone has to be able to adapt it in their own ways and make it work for their own districts. So I'm really grateful for that leniency and that flexibility that it does give us, but again, that it is a minimum suggestion, not a fix everybody with a one-stop shop.
Your thoughts?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for having Mary and I here today. I am a mother of a teenager who will be starting high school at Plymouth Canton Community Schools. I'm also the board president there. And in addition to this, I'm instructional technology manager at Wayne Risa, which is my full-time day job. So it's lots of different hats coming into this work. As Mary mentioned, it's been an honor and privilege to serve on this council, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to serve and do this important work and to be able to contribute in a meaningful way. I represented the parent group and was also part of the special populations and equity subgroup, where we dove deeper into the work to ensure that we put an emphasis on building strong relationships with students and families. We had lots of discussions on the importance of building community support for our students, as they've had to make so many transitions during this pandemic and have had to deal with trauma. So kind of what Mary was saying, we had to look at this whole situation in broad perspective. So we're looking at so many different layers to this. We had a lot of students that fall under the special populations category, and we want to make sure that they have access to the support they need to be successful in their educational setting. We also know that families have been hit hard with economic and health challenges, which was another part of our discussion. So we had to take into consideration a lot of different things with students and families. Throughout the entire process in our small and large group meetings, everyone contributed with their full hearts and minds. Each of us understood our charge and worked tirelessly to read, plan, discuss, meet, listen, research, provide input through multiple channels. I have to give a huge shout out to our chairwoman, Tanya Allen, who facilitated all of the discussions and meetings with integrity and compassion and allowed all voices to be heard. I mean, kudos to her for facilitating 25, 30 people at a time in a short amount of time to digest and have those conversations, again, through verbal comments and through the chat box that were coming in through emails. So a huge shout out to her for coordinating this work. We had a lot of discussions and debates where we didn't always agree, but everyone was very respectful, which I so appreciated. We had a lot of discussions around face coverings, busing, physical spaces, schedules, need for school nurses with limited budgets, PPE, cleaning, technology access, funding challenges, as we just talked about, and so much more. And these discussions were intense, but everybody had a safe space to share their thoughts and different perspectives. We also understood that we're dealing with a very complex situation, just like the governor said, with so many unknowns, and there is no single solution for our schools that will work for everyone in Michigan. So we had to create a plan that was flexible enough to meet the different regions of the state. We have a very unique state, and we had to look at all the different flexible options. And ultimately, we made decisions based on science, research, and data with a focus of keeping our students, families, educators, and staff safe while providing our students with the best instructional environments possible. We still have a lot of work to do within our local regions and with the continuation of this work. And I look forward to doing more of that work with Mary and others.
Great. Thank you both for putting your time into that, Council. I know it was a lot of work over the last month or so. Masks has come up over and over and over again in the chat box, and so I'm going to try to summarize the question best I can. But a lot of it falls around why don't we require masks in K-5, both for the students and for the teachers? In phase 5, they're not required either, and why does that make a difference? And the big question, I think, is what about the parents or students that don't wear face masks just because? Not because it's a medical reason, but because they have another reason that they're not going to wear the mask, or the parent is not going to supply or require that their child wear the mask. How will schools deal with those sorts of students? And can you talk a little about why the masks in the upper grades and not the lower grades, and in phase 4 and not phase 5?
Who are you asking?
Either of you.
I can answer first. I know that the logic behind dividing the grades up was because in grades 6 through 12, they tend to move for different classes, and they don't stay in one classroom all day. So they're intermixing with different groups of children and teachers throughout the day. So for that reason, first and foremost, I think that was the approach. And with the younger children, we tend to see that they stay in their classroom all day. So they are almost in a cohort situation, and the masks are still recommended for them when they're in common areas, when they're walking in the hallways. Masks are required for everyone when they're riding the bus, no matter what their age is. And with the people who don't wear a mask or don't want to wear a mask, it is going to require a note from a medical professional stating why you can't wear a mask. As someone who is on my district's policy committee, that is one of our first tasks. And I would encourage all of you to do the same with your policy committee, and have those policies and procedures in place ahead of the school year beginning, so that when you run into these situations, there isn't a debate. It is a new policy. It is in alliance with the roadmap. And this is just the way it is. These are, the rules that we are following per the governor. And this is what you need to follow per your admission to this district. Because if we don't work together and we don't make these policies, people are going to interpret them in any way they want. And that's not something we can have when we're dealing with large populations.
And I echo everything that Mary just said, and that's exactly how we just need to approach it in terms of building that work into our local policies and ensuring that our community members and staff have opportunities to craft those policies. I will say, as a parent, one of the things that we have to do is to give kids opportunities to practice what it's like wearing a mask, because it's not that bad. Once they get used to it, just like us as adults, we had to wear a mask for a couple of hours at a time, and we thought, oh my gosh, how can you wear this all day? And now I'm to a point where when I'm out and even at work, we can wear it 8-10 hours without a problem. So I would encourage parents to get involved and have kids try different masks. We know this is one of the best ways to protect ourselves and those around us from this new virus. And It's an easy solution that many of us can do. And again, as Mary mentioned, if there is a medical reason, we know that there are some sensory issues with students. There are some students who can't wear one. So there is a medical waiver that you can get with your medical provider.
Randy, do you want to weigh in on the difference between phase 4 and 5 and the requirement of masks?
So, frankly, this was not something that the entire advisory council was, all 29 members were completely united around. And there was definitely different viewpoints. Ultimately, when we took this to the governor, she concluded that in phase 4, if we move, if we ultimately move to phase 5 and then have to move back to phase 4, or if most of the state stays in phase 4, there is, evidence of community spread, and it needed to be something that is required statewide, no questions asked. As we move into phase 5, we recognize that the virus is more contained, and the governor, shared that context matters and that there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. And as many of you have noted in the chat, there's, big differences between communities, even within a region. And then ultimately, so she wanted to give some flexibility in due recognition of local control. And then secondly, I would say that she recognized that in order for this to actually be successful, we needed local buy-in, and we needed local leaders to make these decisions and sort of stand by them. And so she, really wants the local school board members to support the policy that makes sense for their community after listening to constituents, and ultimately, stand with her in enforcing the policy, just like she is doing around My Safe Start.
And is there a way, I know Mary and Anupam, we talked about this a little bit earlier, so to state for the bigger group, how should schools deal with the student that doesn't wear a mask, but is not medically able to wear, but is not wearing? We hear stories of, mask police and retail and things like that. But how would you recommend, and how have you looked at, maybe for your districts, how you're going to enforce those measures?
Yeah, those are, again, conversations that we had repeatedly within our discussions throughout the council, the meetings. I think it comes down to having those open lines of communications with the parent and their child, the student and the families. It really does come down to understanding the importance and the value that we bring into our community with this one act of wearing a mask. And someone mentioned in the comments, it's like, how do you show respect to students who have severe peanut allergies? So again, we build those policies in our classroom culture around the understanding that we have to do what we can as a community to keep our kids, our families safe. And this is, I would start with a conversation of why we're doing this. It is backed by science. We've spent many, many years in the hospital. I've come from a family of doctors and nurses. I mean, this is what the recommendation is, and I trust the science and the data behind it. And of course, again, the medical waiver for those that can't tolerate it. But it really does come down to educating our families and to share that this is important. And then also to not make it a huge discipline issue. And again, I think it may come up to that, but that should be something outlined in your policy. But we're lucky at Plymouth Canton, we have restorative practices. So this is one of those things where we would have conversations with a student if it's a repeated offense, and not make it a punitive conversation, but to talk about why. Is there a misunderstanding? Is there a discomfort? Is there something else? And to really work with students. And I would say the first week is going to be hard. So school districts really need to plan for that first week to allow for flexibility. And again, as a parent, that's why I'm advocating for the parents to be out there helping their kids get used to this, little 1 hour at a time before school starts. So by the time we're back into school, they're going to be used to it. Mary, I think you had we had this conversation earlier. You had a lot of great thoughts.
I agree with everything you said, Anupam, and I also want to say that not every district is the same, and not every method works for every school or every student. I think that this really has to be a district level approach. I think that it has to be a almost a compliance campaign on the school's part. Teachers are very powerful. And when a teacher sets an example and has a way of explaining why something is important, their students really listen and they really gravitate to that. I know how valuable teachers are in my own children's lives and my life, and I can
what the hell?
defer what my child is talking about to, well, what would your teacher say? And that works. So when students or families are having a hard time and our districts are sending out this kindness culture or this, compliance sort of campaign where, we're doing this to protect our neighbor, we're doing this to protect you, we're doing this to protect me. And then we're letting the districts decide how they handle the non-compliance part on their own. I think that that's the best approach. This isn't out to hurt anybody. This is out literally to help everyone. And when we explain that and we make that clear, it's not a threat. It's not a punitive issue. We're doing this because we want everyone to stay safe and healthy, and we want to stay in school. And then when everyone takes that approach and they decide what's best for their family, whether they're going to comply or not, then the school districts can make those decisions individually on how to deal with that specific situation. Because we can't make decisions for the whole. We have to make decisions for the individual level.
I'm going to ask one more question about face coverings and masks, and I swear I'll change the subject. There's been a lot of question about face shields versus face masks, and could those be considered the same thing? And would that be allowed to be worn? And that also translated into some of the staff, or like the cleaning staff and things like that. Could they wear a face shield while they're doing that cleaning versus a mask? For whatever reason they see that. Do you see those as two separate things, as a mask and a shield, or do you see those as serving the same purpose?
That question has come up a ton. And so we've actually officially requested that the Office of Legal Counsel issue that as like a formal FAQ. If some of you have seen our previous executive orders, the more complex ones include like a supplemental FAQ document. And of course, all the education ones do, because they tend to be the most complex executive orders that we issue. So we are going to formally answer that I anticipate that we will formally answer that in an FAQ. Our Office of Legal Counsel is consulting with DHHS right now, Dr. Calhoun and her team, to ensure that they are comfortable with officially saying that yes, face shields can be used as facial coverings, particularly for students and staff. For those that are doing cleaning, I think we still recommend a surgical mask, not an N95 mask, but a higher quality mask than just a plain cloth mask, and that's in the roadmap. But we are I would anticipate that within the next couple of days. And when we do release that FAQ, there will probably be some other issues that are of importance. I will make sure that Jen gets that and send it out to them.
All right, so we talked a little at the beginning about what other things are we going to have to look at going forward in the school year. And one of the big questions that comes up is testing. And we've seen that Dr. Rice has sent a letter requesting that we don't have federal mandated testing this year. Has any of that, the standardized tests, the statewide tests, any of that come up in your work on the council? And what sort of conversations have you had?
It came up a lot in the advisory council. deep, robust conversations. And I will say, and certainly happy to let Mary and Anupam weigh in. I will say for the most part, the advisory council was pretty unanimous that assessments should be waived for the next year. But then also recognize that it was a bit outside the scope of what the advisory council, first and foremost task was, which is the health and safety protocols that schools will need to implement in order to resume face-to-face instruction. But it's high on the list, I would say, that the policy and budget subcommittee will address. Our hope is that the legislature will provide clarity around the expectation once we hear back from Secretary DeVos on our waiver. And so that's going to be our first line of defense. Our hope is that we will work with the legislature on a number of issues that have come up, even within this chat around days and hours and seat time waiver and attendance and count day. We need the legislature to help define that, likely as part of the budget process, like the governor mentioned. And then, if they choose not to address it at all, then that's then we will deal with that. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But our hope is that we can work collaboratively with the legislature on some of those policy decisions, including assessments.
Anything else to add?
Yeah, I'll just add to that. One of the things, as Brandy was saying, this was one of the heated discussions. With regard to the state mandated assessments, we all felt, well, first of all, they take a lot of time. So you come back to school and you're going to be spending weeks and weeks on NWEA, MSTEP, all of the other required assessments. And we felt like there were other ways that the schools could do assessments. And we want to see where the gaps are with students. And so again, schools can come up with their own assessments to gauge where students are and to find those gaps and to build and work on eliminating those gaps. So we do value assessments, but we're not sure if spending the first month back to school on assessments was the best way to go. So I think asking for a waiver is a good step. And again, allowing the local school districts to figure out local assessments to work with their students and improve their, and work on the gaps.
How about buses? We talk about being in schools and mask wearing and social distancing and hand washing and all of that. But when it comes to transportation, you've got different ages on buses. What guidance is there for buses, or what requirements did you talk about for buses?
Yeah, the biggest one is facial coverings. So that is what was determined by the council, is that it would be almost completely infeasible to do social distancing on school buses. The two superintendents on the advisory council helped us cost out what it would take to mandate social distancing on busing. And it was, practically impossible from a resource standpoint, which is why the council recommended to the governor, and the governor accepted, that in phase 4, facial coverings for all students and staff and the bus driver is non-negotiable. It is strongly, strongly recommended that in phase 5 as well. And so that, that's where the council and the governor landed on that. And there's also mandatory requirements around cleaning and disinfecting for that in phase 4, and then some additional, strong recommendations.
That leads perfectly into the question that just popped up about the required phase 4 classroom cleaning is challenging and will make it hard to do face-to-face instruction at the secondary level. Are there suggestions for the high school level, or probably even the middle school level, so that they could get to a full-time return to learning face-to-face?
I would agree that it's challenging. I don't know what else. Say that it's definitely It's definitely challenging. Ultimately, the advisory council didn't think it was impossible. And then in terms of resources, the governor mentioned the $256 million of CARES Act dollars allocated to schools in due recognition of the real cost of implementing some of the requirements. And we hope more to come, certainly.
Mary and Anupa, any thoughts on what you're doing in your districts or ideas that you're taking back to your individual boards?
I think it's really going to be based on what those monies will allow. Because right now in our district, all we worried about by June 30th was our new budget with our assumed cuts. And as of right now, we're not sure how much money we're going to be receiving for these precautions that we have to take due to the virus and PPE and all the extra cleaning and all that sort of stuff. So I'm sure that districts are just like mine, and they're waiting to hear what kind of funding we will receive, what that will allow for. And in the meantime, encouraging the staff that we do have, that we do know will be in the buildings, just to do what they can to keep the most cleanliness up front and, as a priority. I don't know what the answer is. This is not an easy question. It's like the busing. We can't run 10 buses on, one route to make sure that we social distance the kids and we get them there at all different times of the day, and school runs from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. None of that will work. So being able to tell districts how they can get their classrooms cleaned and disinfected to the level it needs to be is something that they'll have to work on individually, because sizes matter, the amount of desks matter, the amount of kids matter, the size of even the building or the table that the children are sitting at or the desks that the students are moving in and out of every hour is going to vary. So I don't think it's something that we can decide on a global level. It really has to be on an individual basis.
Yeah, I agree. And just as Brandy and Mary have said, this was a huge debate as well, and very challenging in the midst of these huge budget cuts that we are facing as we start the new school year in the middle of a pandemic, budget cuts like we've never seen in history. And then we have to come up with creative solutions, not just to educate our students, but to come up with additional supplies for cleaning, PPE. And, one thing is to isolate the budget, figure out how we're going to get the money. The other is the supply issue. I worry that we're going to run out of supplies very quickly, and I don't know where we're going to come up with ways to continue the supply chain because we saw back in March, we hit a point where we just didn't have the supplies. So there are a lot of challenges that are beyond our hands at this point. But I also know that school districts have been talking about being creative with trying to make sure if students can stay in a classroom, and a teacher would come in and out if possible. Again, it depends on the teacher, it depends on the class, it depends on so many variables. But we do hope that those discussions happen at the local level to see how many ways that we can isolate kids in a particular environment rather than have them move from class to class, to have a teacher move if it's feasible. So again, we're looking at all sorts of options in addition to the funding and the supply, but this is a huge challenge for us.
So for the last question, funding is always a big deal, but connectivity is also, as we talk about parents who don't want to send their kids back yet, that we may need to be doing distance learning. If for some reason we go backwards and we need to do distance learning, has the council talked about ways to incentivize the expansion of broadband in areas, whether that's locally or if that's with companies, or ways to make sure that all of our kids have a way, if they do have broadband in their house, if they have a way to connect to it. These obviously came up a lot in the spring when we moved very quickly to distance learning. But now that we have some time to think about it, is this something that maybe the council is considering and working on as we go forward now that this roadmap is out?
Yeah, we definitely didn't have time to talk about that in this 24-day sprint of the council meeting to develop the roadmap. And so we kept, the council stayed very focused on health and safety protocols. And in the event of in-person instruction, so we really focused the vast majority of the time on phase 4 and phase 5 required versus recommended health and safety protocol, and then supplementing it with some of the things that Mary and Anupam mentioned around mental health and wellness, and supports for special students with special needs. So perhaps the advisory council will discuss this. I'll just add that I know this is this is a really strong priority of Superintendent Rice, and I know that MDE is wanting to really elevate and provide some leadership on this issue. Superintendent Rice has some federal CARES Act dollars. This is the 10% of ESSER, or the holdback, if any of that sounds familiar, but he has some federal funds, and I think he's indicated pretty publicly that broadband access would be a top priority for the use of those funds. So I hope I'm not speaking out of school or for him. This is also a priority. It's certainly a priority of the governors, and I think you should expect to hear a little bit more about that in the coming week or two. And DTMB, the Department of Technology Management and Budget, has also indicated that broadband access is certainly a priority.
And I'd like to add to what Brandy just said. I also belong to a METAL group, which is the Michigan Educational Technology Leaders in the state of Michigan, which is a branch of MAISA. And they have been they've been trying to procure dollars and devices, hotspots, and they are working on a plan to figure out a way to make broadband a utility. We know that there are a lot of gaps in Michigan in rural areas, particularly where hotspots just not going to work. So even though we could get hotspots, they're just not going to work in certain regions. So the METAL group is looking at a state education network. They actually have a map that they've been working on for the past 5-7 years, and their goal is to expand broadband to every home, every building, and they will continue to work on that. And of course, this just kind of pushes that work to another level. So I would look at their guidance and their recommendations as well.
Any last thoughts, Mary, Brandy, or Anupam?
I'll just share that, you know, it was our intent to ensure we had one board member on the advisory council, but I was really, really glad to put 2 of them on. You know, I would just share with MASB membership that Mary and Anupam did an incredible job representing your voices on the advisory council. They were so engaged and so participatory over the last month, and I think their perspectives actually truly did make the roadmap and the executive order that accompanied it stronger. So I just wanted to thank the 2 of them for their service on the advisory council. It was incredibly valuable.
And I really appreciated the opportunity to work with Mary, Brandy, and others. You know, I have to say, these were difficult conversations. We're dealing with a complex situation, like I said earlier, but everybody's committed to doing the best that we can. And Mary and I, we heard from lots of parents, lots of board members. So we heard so many voices, and we know that there's so many challenges with the situation that we're in. And our goal is to keep our kids, our families, and our educators safe while we create that instructional environment that gets them high quality instruction that they need. So we're trying to do it all in the best way possible. And that means things are going to look different at times, different scenarios with different districts and different times within the phases. But we are in this together, and it's important to support one another and keep everyone safe. And I know we will get through this.
I would just like to express my gratitude and thanks for being a part of the committee. It was truly an honor to work with such professionals. People from all areas were on this committee, from epidemiology to, catastrophe interventions, to the government, to educators, to, we even had a student from Detroit Public Schools, and everyone's voice was heard. It was really a wonderful group. I'm excited to continue the work. We have another meeting still this week. So the work is not over. It is just that the roadmap has been delivered. So our mission and our goals will continue. I'm really excited to see what's coming next when we do get back together to provide tools to the districts to implement the roadmap. So this is not, a one-stop shop. We are still working, and there will be much more fruits of this labor coming. I'm confident of it, and everyone's best interest is taken to heart. All considerations are valuable, and every voice is really heard in this community. So I really appreciate that. I love the fact that I can send a question to Brandy and she will respond right away. This is not a hierarchy type of situation. Everybody is valuable and representative of every student and teacher and family in Michigan. So it's really a great collective work, and I'm really proud to be a part of it.
Well, we thank you for your time today and for all your time on the council, and Brandy from the governor's office for joining us. I know there are a lot of questions that we didn't get to, and we will be collecting all of those and sending them off to the people to answer them in the best way we can. And I am going to turn it over to our executive director for some final closing comments.
Thanks, Jen. I want to extend a thank you to the people that Mary and Anupam for representing the school board voice on the task force, for Brandy for participating, and of course the governor. And to all of you, when the governor's office called early last week before the official announcement, she fully understands that this is going to be a heavy lift for school board members. You are going to be asked to pass policies and make decisions that are not mandates. And I posted during the chat that because of the differences that we have, I was just in the UP last week in a county where they've had, I think, 12 total cases. And we have counties, of course, that have thousands. And the districts, the school districts and the communities then approach this COVID situation differently because of that. And it does rest at the school board level to make those differences and listen to your communities and do outreach. But I know that that's not easy, and there's repercussions, and people have talked about families and kids making decisions to either attend school or not attend school, depending on masks. So it is a heavy lift. MASB will do whatever we can to try to provide you resources and information. We will continue kind of the member matters calls over the summer so that we can hear what districts are doing to help give you some ideas on what this is going to be like. I know we're going to be doing our Summer Institute in August, just before the deadline for plans, just a couple days before, to provide you more information. And I think you'll also expect that during the course of the school, just like your continuity of learning plans, you will make changes in these plans based on feedback from your staff and based on feedback from your teachers and your support staff and your community. So I don't think we should be thinking of this as you're going to make a decision the first week of August and that is how you will run your school through the different phases through the rest of the year. It's going to end up being a fluid document based on what you're hearing from all your stakeholders. And if you have ideas during this summer and through the school year where MASB can be of service and provide you information or guidance or information, we will continue to try to do that. It's going to be a tough year for everybody, just as the last 4 months have been. I don't expect that this gets easier. I'm just happy that all of you that are on the call today and other members that couldn't be care about the kids in Michigan as much as you do. And because of that, you are stepping up and taking on this task. So I just want to extend that thank you, and thank you for being on the call today, and we will let you know as we have more information or other future calls scheduled.
Great. Thank you all again for being here. We have recorded this and we will make it available hopefully by Friday for all of you and anyone that you want to share it with. We will get that link out. It'll be on our website. And as always, if you have other questions or other things come up, feel free to contact any of us. We're always here to answer your questions. Enjoy the rest of your day.